Let's start this webinar with a short prayer. I will invite you to put in the presence of the Lord, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Padre Dios, yo nunca me he sentido tan solo, nunca me imaginé enfrentarme a una situación como esta y estoy asustado. Por favor, recuérdame que tú estás conmigo. Permíteme sentir tu presencia. Recuérdame que como tu hijo, tú no me has dado un espíritu temeroso. Remind me that I can trust you with whatever may come. Lord, this isolation is overwhelming. I know I could pick up the phone and call someone, but I don't want to be a burden. Please help me to have concern for others above myself. Yo sé que no soy el único que se siente solo. Dame el coraje para salir y ofrecer consuelo a otros. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. As it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Carlos. Dear confreres and the lay partners, I'm very happy to welcome all of you for this webinar. Probably this is the first time that we have a session with large numbers of confreres and lay partners, connecting everyone from north to south and east to west. I thank you for your participation. We have many confreres, as you can see. Probably some more will join as the sessions go on. There are nearly 10 lay partners and nearly 150 theology students participating from Llyod, Indonesia, Malang, Indonesia, common formation houses in Ghana and Kenya, from Chicago Theological House, and a few others from other formation houses. Welcome to all of you. This pandemic has touched everyone, every sector in the world.
Thank you.
Amidst this context, we are trying to reflect what is at stake for us as divine word missionaries and lay partners. Probably this webinar will give some light on this. We are reflecting our mission today with a paradigm of a prophetic dialogue. A warm welcome to Father Budi Kleden, our Superior General, the counselors, PRM superiors, and all the confreres from all over the world, and our seminarians more especially, who have gathered in different groups in their own formation houses, and the lay partners for this session. Now, I invite Father Budi Kleden to give the inaugural address. Over to you, Father Budi.
Thank you, Stan. Dear lay mission partners, dear confreres, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to every one of you in your respective place. I also would like to welcome you to this two-day webinar on pandemic and prophetic dialogue. Times of crisis like this of COVID-19 pandemic are times of truth. Such time reveals our profound reality, our fragility and vulnerability, but also our strengths and opportunities as human family. We have seen how important pillars of our social, economic, and religious life are collapsing. We have to cancel a lot of programs without being able to reschedule them. We have been deprived of projects, of goods, and of the power to manage our own lives, works, and missions. In all these sad and confusing situations, one of the inspiring and encouraging experiences is to see that everywhere many conference and lay mission partners are taking initiative to reach out to the poor and most vulnerable in our society, such as the daily wage workers and the homeless. In different places, conference and our laity have found new ways to proclaim the word of God, the word of truth, hope, and consolation. The pandemic does not stop us from being missionaries. We do not let ourselves be paralyzed. At the same time, reflections on how to respond to this crisis, what is the mission of the church and of the society, are being shared at different levels. Therefore, the idea was born to organize such a sharing at the society level. The intention is that we do not waste the most beautiful and deep insights which have arisen during this time of trial for renewal and transformation of our life and mission. I am convinced that the way forward is joint reflection and discernment, a way of dialogue, yes, of prophetic dialogue, in which the Spirit finds the space to guide us. I thank Father Stanis Lazar for organizing this webinar and all the resource persons who are ready to share your reflection. I thank all of you for showing not only and not just your interest, but also your commitment to this very important discussion on pandemic and prophetic dialogue. I wish all of us a fruitful webinar. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Father Budi Kleden, for this inaugural address and giving us a kind of an orientation and the purpose of this particular seminar, so that we could look forward to reflect along with our conference and the speakers. Now, as we begin this, I want to give once again simple instructions. I have sent mails in different ways, different times. You have received all of them, but still once again, kindly use the chat box for your comments, your questions, and the way you want to appreciate and different other aspects. Please use the chat box. There won't be any time for direct questions or clarifications because we have many speakers, as you have seen. Today we have 6 speakers and tomorrow we have got 10 speakers. So there won't be much time for a lot of interactions. All the same, please use the chat box. We will pick up the questions what you have raised. Now, also, once again, want to remind, please select the language. You go to the interpretation column that is below. There is a globe there. In that globe, if you click, then you will be able to see the language, English and Spanish, and then you select the language. First, we have 3 speakers. Then after the 3 speakers, we will take up some of the questions. We interact our conversation with the speakers. Then we will have a break. Then we continue with the other 3 speakers later on. Okay, we begin now. The first speaker, Father Joseph Mundananikkal. I just want to introduce him. He is the member of the India Mumbai province. He has a doctorate degree in sociology from the University of Mumbai, India. And now he teaches sociology at the same university and is also a staff member at the Institute of Indian Culture, Mumbai. That is our SVD Institute. Over to you, Father Joseph.
Am I audible, Father Stan?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello to all the conference and lay collaborators. Thanks to Father Stan for this invitation to share some views on the economic crisis and the kind of dialogue that we can think about. Yeah. Also a shout out to Father Budi Kleden for those introductory remarks. I will start. I have a PowerPoint ready, so I will just present the screen and then just maybe talk a little in detail on what is on the screen. Is the screen visible to everyone?
It is, I think it's just coming.
Ah, okay.
It's not it. Yes, now it's okay.
Okay, thanks. Thanks. Okay, it's something on the economic situation, and there's so much out there, you know, like a lot of people have reflected on it. A lot of writings are available. So for me, it was a question of choosing what to highlight and what not to. So I have made certain selections, very arbitrary kind of selections. And I have shared it with Father Stan in a written format. This is just, I'm just bringing up certain themes as focus. So I begin by one aspect, not so much economic to begin with, but in a sense economic, which is also where leadership matters. And this was one report that came out in different international press in terms of leadership given by heads of state. So I have a quote there, an analysis of 122 speeches made by heads of governments across the globe. It shows a contrast between men leaders and women leaders, or male leaders and female leaders. So on the one hand, we have men using the imageries of war, analogies of fear-based tactics. On the other hand, we have women focused on people, families, children, and vulnerable groups. So this has something to do with what I'm going to say later. That's why I have used this as the first slide. The second is something on policies. I have the picture there of Slavoj Zizek's book on pandemic, COVID-19 Shakes the World. So this is, I have paraphrased something that Zizek says there. This is towards the end of that book, where Zizek uses this word disaster communism in the place of disaster capitalism. So he says that in the last 3 to 4 decades, the world has seen disaster capitalism. And the pandemic is there at the zenith of it. So he proposes, or he's very optimistic in that sense, and it is nice to see Jacek optimistic, where he talks about a disaster communism, where he talks that about measures of welfare in a scale never seen before. Institutional health systems would be bolstered by international collaboration. And he talks about local participation of local communities. And he talks very importantly about there would be, he hopes for, a stoppage of warmongering and structures of exclusion, which will eventually lead to a more humane and welfare-oriented world. A very, very optimistic kind of look on the pandemic by Jacek. This book was published last May 2020. Now, one of the themes that I have come across by reports of the World Economic Forum, the Oxfam Foundation, and a whole lot of international agencies is something that is termed the pandemic of inequality. And I begin, I have 2 or 3 slides on this. I begin by a quote by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. I read the quotation in full. The COVID-19 pandemic has played an important role in highlighting growing inequalities. It exposed the myth that everyone is in the same boat. While we are all floating on the same sea, it is clear that some are in super yachts while others are clinging to the drifting debris. So this sets the tone for the pandemic of inequality, research-based findings that are available on the web, mostly on the web, and also published kind of material. I've just taken very few glimpses of that. To begin with, the inequalities that have become very marked in the world over a period of time, especially ever since neoliberal economics has become the kind of a norm across the world. These inequalities have got widened and very strongly accentuated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The recent estimate by Pew Research Center talks about an erosion of the middle class. This is important because in many growing economies, the bulging middle class since the 1990s was seen as the kind of the driving force of prosperity. And the COVID-19 pandemic has directly hit that bulging middle class. That is one. The second aspect of that is an exponential increase in the number of people who have fallen into poverty. And this has also inequality built into it, international inequality built into it as well. Oxfam International estimated that as of July 2020, there were 121 million people, more people on the brink of starvation than before. And around 12,000 people would die every year from COVID-19 induced hunger. These are very stark kind of figures made available by Oxfam International. According to the figures released by World Food Programme, as against the assistance given to 97 million people that they gave in 2019, the figure in 2020 jumped to 138 million people worldwide. Now that's one side of the inequality. Now we go to the other side. And this side of the inequality can actually be captured by this by now very, very popular kind of a coinage by David Harvey, urban biographer David Harvey, who terms it accumulation by dispossession. Again, there's a lot of statistics out there. I'm just taking a couple. Worldwide, billionaires' wealth increased by a staggering $3.9 trillion because between 18 March and 31st December 2020. Governments used the pandemic-induced state of lockdown to push through ultra neoliberal policies and laws, which actually are favoring the high billionaire capitalist class at the expense of welfare policies. In addition to this particular pandemic of inequality is in line with another kind of a system that is happening, which I have captioned here as Orwellian systems of control. The imagery, it is taken from George Orwell's book 1984. So you have, in the wake of the pandemic, you have a reign of unprecedented surveillance, detention, and containment of dissent. And this particular system of control, aided by the systems of surveillance made possible by the innovations in technology today, is most visible in nations ruled by what is today called authoritarian populist men. I don't have to name them, all of us know them, and they're all across the globe. And this has stifled all the impulses of human rights, the right to life, right to hold opinions, and freedom of expression. Highly held values of human development made sacrosanct by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. They have been actually stifled very, very badly in this pandemic times. Now I go to a little more into microeconomics. We go into a little more specifics. And one of the areas that I begin by is what is actually called informal economy. A report prepared by the International Labour Organization estimated that the pandemic induced loss of about 195 million full-time jobs, or 6.7% of global working hours are lost. In a country like India, where around 76.2% of the total workforce is working in the informal sector, they lost their jobs overnight when a total lockdown was instituted. And this is a similar picture across different countries of the world, especially in the developing world. Internal migration is something that has fueled the engines of developing economies. The engines of the developing economy, people who migrate within a nation from one place to another, and basically working in informal labor. And the pandemic induced kind of lockdowns and containment kind of exercises made their livelihood very precarious and almost nil. And then in India, what happened last year with complete lockdown, there was no transport to go home. They just started walking thousands of kilometers to reach their so-called native places. And so that's a sight that was in the sight of everyone. Then I would like to go to another aspect of this inequality that COVID-19 has set in place. I have just titled it Intersections. Many more things can be brought into it. I've just summarized what I have said in my paper into just sentences. Number one, inequalities based on ethnicity have widened in the time of the pandemic. There are research papers which I read, especially from the US and the UK mainly, which talked about how the pandemic induced measures and the policies of the state have very adversely affected the Black people and the Latinx people, especially with the women among them, and all the statistics and all the graphs are also available there. Coming on to the gender issue, it has been observed that women, particularly women among the working classes, have borne the brunt of the pandemic in comparison to men, because they are overrepresented in precarious occupations. Because we talk about frontline workers, caregivers, all of these occupations, even hospitality industry, all of these actually are filled with a lot of women, and they have borne the brunt of the pandemic, not only in terms of the dangers posed by the pandemic, but also the economic losses. The third point there is something very unique to India. The word used for, everyone lightheartedly started using the word social distancing, which actually meant only physical distancing. I was wondering who actually coined this word, because if there is a virus around and if it is communicable, you need to keep it a physical distance from the other person. But the word used by, I think it was the World Health Organization's head who used this word social distancing first, and everyone started using it. Now, this has been a traumatic kind of a word for the Dalits of India, the ex-untouchables of India, because they have borne the brunt of social distancing for centuries. And now this word is used in the place of physical distancing. And Dalit intellectuals in India questioned this, and they had written on it. And in addition to this, there is the practice of manual scavenging in India, which is actually done by the majority of the Dalit communities. And they bore the brunt of all of these cleaning up activities that had to be done in the wake of the pandemic. Also, the other distancing, cultural, ritual distancing that has always been there, got new form, took on new forms in the time of the pandemic. I have mentioned one example there in the fourth point, where reports were there from different parts of India, where containment centers where people were housed. If the food for those centers were cooked by women or men from the Dalit communities or ex-untouchable communities, other people refused to eat that food. So there are also studies with regard to sexual minorities and other minorities. A whole lot of material is out there. And also another group of people who got affected by the pandemic a lot are differently abled people, because differently abled people depend on others, other abled people, other kind of people for their survival, for their daily needs. And that is something that was stopped by the pandemic as well. So this is the intersections. A lot more is there that we can talk about. So in a sense, these are some of the themes that I have actually addressed in that paper. I was just trying to give a summary of that in this entire presentation. So I would just like to conclude it. I started with Jacek. I conclude with him. Again, a quote from that book, Pandemic. It is through our effort to save humanity from self-distraction that we are creating a new humanity. It is only through this mortal thread that we can envision a unified humanity. And I would like to stop this presentation on this very optimistic note from Jacek. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for this short and very precise presentation. As dear listeners, participants of this particular webinar, the participants have received actually most of the papers, and this is only a gist. Therefore, the speaker cannot give all the details, but then he gives a gist within 15 minutes. I would like to just to congratulate Joseph for presenting very precisely the pandemic of inequality, going to the accumulation by disposition, where the stark realities are already at place, manipulating especially the vulnerables. Also the governments also, in a way, most of the governments have promoted these high billionaires into a particular upper class orientations. Authoritarian populist men actually have stifled or stifled the rights of the others, internal migration and gender issues and so forth. And he had given from his own experience and research which was done actually in India. With these particular realities of dialogue with the economic crisis, we move on to the next topic, that is the dialogue with the sick, infected and affected families. We now have the second speaker, Jacek Gniadek.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. He worked as a missionary in Congo, Botswana, Liberia, and Zambia, as a doctoral degree in moral theology. From 2016, he is the director of the Fu Migrant Center in Poland and president of the Cunningham Association, Michael Boehm. He is very active in the academic field as well as in the other ministries. Now over to you, Jacek Gniadek.
Okay, is 1 moment. Okay, it's working, yeah?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Yes, so okay, thank you very much, Stanislas. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start with this dialogue with sick and affected families with an old Chinese story about a man who went to the market to buy shoes. But before that, he measured his foot length and wrote it down on a piece of paper. Unfortunately, after arriving to town, he found that he had forgotten the measurements card. He rushed home to get it. When he came back to town, the market was closed and he didn't buy any shoes. He only wasted time. Disappointed, he told his story to a friend, and when he asked him why he hadn't tried the shoe on the spot, he replied that he believed the measurements more. So today people have lost touch with reality. Politicians, doctors, and journalists believe more the models that predict the development of a pandemic than common sense. Decisions are made by politicians who have appointed expert councils. Chaos and lack of logic emerge from the decisions. This creates an atmosphere of fear in which it is difficult to distinguish someone suffering from COVID-19 from those infected with the coronavirus and those affected by it. How are we as the divine missionaries and the church to respond to these challenges? The answer to this question requires a general context first. So the sick person is not just someone who is in a hospital on a COVID ward. Health, according to the definition of the World Health Organization, is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. These dimensions correspond to the three terms present in the English language: disease, illness, a sense of discomfort, and sickness, that is how the sick person is seen by the society. For the medicine, the key concept is the biological dimension of the disease, but in fact, the subjective dimension is the most important. We have all focused on COVID and forgotten the millions of people with chronic diseases. About 1,200 people die in Poland every day, including about 300 people from cancer. Today's pandemic is not one of the greatest pandemics it has been in the human history. By comparison, in the previous century, the Spanish flu claimed over 50 million deaths worldwide. So scientific research is important, but it doesn't mean that it is sufficient to make clinical decisions. What is more important, that is the individual skills and experience of the doctor on the spot, who can choose a procedure he believes is optimal in a given situation. For this to be the case, we must take into account the patient's value system and preferences. Unfortunately, but there is no such approach today. Treatment decisions are made in government offices. The doctor has little room for maneuver, and the dissenting opinion is censored in social media on, for instance, Facebook or Twitter, with the one narrative dominating the public television and mainstream media. Three American doctors, the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, believe that lockdown policies have a devastating effect on short and long-term public health. They were last month invited by the Florida governor to the debate on how to deal with the epidemic, but the YouTube debate video has been removed. There was no lockdown on Florida, and the number of victims is comparable to that in California, where there was a very heavy lockdown. Sweden is an example of a country where the strategy of fighting the pandemic developed according to this principle. Sweden emerged from 2020 with less overall mortality increase than most European countries. So what about the people who wore gloves last year? What do they feel today, learning that based on scientific research, the risk of SARS-CoV-2 contamination from contaminated surfaces is low and almost nil? Such articles we find now in Nature and even in The Lancet. According to the latest scientific research, wearing masks in the open area is pointless. Freedom of movement has been restricted without any scientific basis. People who respect a different strategy express doubts about the official methods of fighting the pandemic used in the most countries of the world are not allowed to speak out. According to WHO, our health also depends on the economic dimension. In addition to economic issues, we have social issues. I mean closing schools and keeping kids in some kind of dissocial bubble. The closing schools and first of all, the so-called outdoor activities is a mistake. More and more children need a psychological and psychiatric assistance. The harm we do to our children is unimaginable, and we will pay this debt for a long time. Andrzej Sponville, a French philosopher, laments the fact that young people were forced to sacrifice on the altar of health their lives for the benefit of the elders. He points out that traditionally parents sacrificed themselves for their children. Today, we are doing the opposite. Morally, I don't think it's okay, he says. More knowledge is dispersed and scattered. Hayek said that knowledge in economics is dispersed, and for this reason, one mind cannot grasp the complex operation of demand, supply, and prices. It is divided between units in fragments that are most often incomplete and sometimes even contradictory. This applies not only to economics, but also to all human sciences, including the field of medicine that deals with public health. Central planning means the end of all rationality. There is everything on the internet, but it is not possible for one person to use this knowledge properly. The cause of today's crisis is the lack of real challenges in the welfare state. Some economists emphasize that removing the word risk from the everyday dictionary creates a word that will not be able to exist for a long time. Falsifying reality leads to a catastrophe. A ship in a harbor is safe, but it's not what ships are built for. No other choice. The Vatican Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith said last year that it's morally permissible to use a COVID vaccine. Last week, the Commission at the Polish Bishop Conference issued a message that AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccine production technology raises serious moral objection. But the position of the Vatican and the Polish Bishop Conference on vaccination boils down to essentially the same content. If we have no choice, we should use the vaccines that are available, especially when we have no real influence on the choice of vaccine. Do we have no choice? We cannot separate this question from the economy. If politicians decide about health, and health is controlled by governments, so there is no freedom in this case to choose between a vaccine or an alternative way of curing from COVID. Why? There is no freedom because political freedom presupposes economic freedom. Despite these difficulties, doctors worldwide are looking for a cure for COVID. One such drug is ivermectin, a drug that fights parasitic disease in animals and humans. WHO and government experts advise against the use of ivermectin, warning of side effects. But Slovakia, for instance, is the first country in the European Union where the government has authorized the use of the ivermectin for the prevention and treatment of COVID. Professor Eli Schwartz, for instance, is an Israeli tropical disease expert who says he has completed clinical trials, has new evidence that ivermectin in developing countries can help shorten the time of infection in people infected with the coronavirus. The drug is approved for therapy in several countries, including, for instance, Uttar Pradesh in India. The state has 200 million inhabitants. Families in quarantine receive an ivermectin package and have around 10,000 deaths. And Poland is 5 times smaller and has 6 times more people who have died because of COVID. So in Poland, the ivermectin is not approved for therapy against COVID. The authorization somehow is for the amantadine, which is in fact used off-label. What does it mean? It is used in a manner other than the officially described on the label. A Polish doctor, there is one who has personally received well over 3,000 sick people with COVID, and all are healthy today. So in medicine, we know and use off-label drugs relatively often, and there is little controversy. The question arises why it is in the case of COVID today. Fighting amantadine at all costs is not worth the energy that its opponents use. The treatment must be evidence-based, and the physician should have the right to choose the treatment that he or she believes in is optimal for the situation. Let's remember the evidence-based medicine I mentioned before about that. Our health and our survival through the SARS-CoV-2 epidemic depends on almost 80% from ourselves and only 20% from the lockdown and the government. We needed to treat comorbidities, reliably build up immunity through regular exercises is worth taking vitamin D as well. So it is difficult to dialogue with the infected since contamination is not the only problem here. PCR tests are used to identify the infected, but PCR tests must also be confirmed by a medical examination. Getting sick should not be equated with infections because these are two different things. Many tests performed give false positive results. Freedom is at stake. Let us go back now to the vaccinations. Health is not only the absence of disease, but also well-being. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith has also reminds that vaccination is not a moral obligation and therefore must be voluntary. Vaccination against COVID is not intended to eliminate the coronavirus, but to mitigate the COVID effects on the human body. Since it is not a moral obligation, it would be natural to take by the Church a position to object to the COVID passport, what many governments planned to introduce and what would lead to a dystopian segregation. Now, new reality. As the society, we are divided. It is hard not to notice that people have now divided into two groups. One group adheres to the anti-pandemic restrictions because of the real fear of getting sick, while the other group adheres to these restrictions for financial reasons, for simply not to pay the fine. In the first group, fear and anxiety develop more and more, while in the second group, frustration and irritation with limitations grows. Both sensations are definitely negative and increase the risk of not only getting COVID, but all other potential infections. In fact, everyone is currently affected by the pandemic, not just the families of the sick and infected themselves. The whole world is sick today and everyone needs to be healed. People do not just today die because of the COVID. What can we do? Let us not get carried away collectively by fear. Let us not allow the fear of death to conquer the love of life. These are the words of the French philosopher I quoted earlier. And at the end, I could go for a quotation from the Bible, but in a situation of fear, in which also is the church, the words of an atheist may be a cold shower for us that it is high time to wake up. The pandemic and technological progress will force new challenges in economic and social life, as we as missionaries will have to walk on unmade paths to show lost people the way. This can only be done by a true witness of the risen Lord. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you very much, Jacek, for this beautiful presentation, as well as giving various questions. Actually, you have raised many questions regarding the sick, infected, and affected families. I see also in the chat box some of the interesting questions. Fear now how to get all these questions answered. Let us see towards the end. Now, regarding your presentations, you raised questions about public health and also asking questions about the governments, how the governments deals with the public health as well as the scientific analysis and scientific research. Therefore, you are asking questions regarding who takes decisions, on whose behalf, and how do they move forward. So it is not only the physical issues of the virus, but also there are many social issues which are connected. You try to raise these things in different way of questions, like affecting fear, irritations, the realities, not so real, and so forth. Therefore, there are many questions. Certainly during this pandemic time, that's what we are trying to raise, and we are searching for answers. We hope as Divine Word missionaries, we will find some way. So thank you very much, Jacek, for your beautiful presentation. And now we go to the third speaker. The third speaker is actually Llyod Cunningham. Now he's known very affectionately Sam, and he will be having the dialogue, having the topic dialogue with the psychologically affected people. As you see, the first day we are seeing the first 5 papers, in fact, the dialogues with the realities, and then we come to the theological reflection towards the end of the day. Father Llyod, or Sam, has a doctorate degree in psychology. He belongs to the United States Chicago province. Presently, he is the assistant professor of psychology at Divine Word College and licensed clinical psychologist and healthcare professional in Iowa and Illinois. He had mission experience in Paraguay and also with USA migrants. With his lot of experience on the field, over to you, Father Sam.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to put this on also on the screen today, and I have some things I will share as I'm talking. I'd like to begin. I'd like to begin with a story. Actually, it's very interesting. When I accepted this invitation to talk, I was recovering from COVID. I was in the last stages of the recovery, more or less. And fortunately, I didn't have to go to the hospital. But this interesting thing about it is how COVID is a strange thing, how it affects the body and also the psyche. And what I'll be talking about is in my own life, when I first started getting the symptoms, I thought I had like sinuses or allergies or whatever that we often get here in the Midwest in the United States during the winter. And so I thought, okay, but they didn't go away and they kept getting worse. And then all of a sudden I felt something else happen in my body that was hard to explain. So I went and got tested. I came back positive. And then after coming back positive, about 3 hours later, I had a panic attack. Now, the panic attack is basically what happens is I felt dizzy. I had to sit down. My breathing got very shallow, and I began pouring out of my body. You know, as a psychologist, I've helped many people get through panic attacks, so I had to take my own advice. And I had to sit down, just write it out, begin to breathe very deeply, and then try to hydrate because I was losing a lot of water because of sweating. But the truth is, the COVID did not cause the panic attack. The panic attack was caused by the cognitions I had been forming in my head for the past almost 8 months, where we began being fearful and also anxious about catching the disease. It's something that was going through my head, which I also had to face because as a 67-year-old man, I could have ended up in the hospital. I could have also been one of the statistics of what is at right now in April of, well, not more than 3 million, but 2,936,926 people who died worldwide, or the 562,000 who died in the United States. Even after recuperating, which is usually between 10 to 14 days, we have long haulers who are experiencing physical symptoms. The more serious are permanent lung and organ damage, as well as blood clots that are causing loss of limbs and strokes. Mentally, people report high incidences of anxiety and depressions. Mental health experts report that whether we contracted the virus or not, a significant portion of the population of the world has been affected through fears and anxiety of catching the disease. Our fears and anxieties have been compounded from the effects of social isolation, from families and friends, government lockdowns, school closings, people losing jobs and economic concerns, and not being able to go on with life as it was in 2019. Many people have lost loved ones and have not been able to grieve with the customary funeral rites. Depression and anxiety are being presented in this country at this time as we move through even the vaccines, through social violence and mass shootings. One of the first trainings I received as a psychologist was in family systems. And, and I think if we use family systems approach and look at COVID, we can see that COVID is a flashing warning system for our society and mental health. What would happen in family systems, many times a parent would bring a child who had been acting out and causing distress in the whole family, and they would say to me, fix them, because we can't continue living like this. Talking with family, it became apparent that the child would be known as an identified patient isn't the real issue. The child acts out in order to stop the fighting of the parents, draw attention to himself, and to catch and hold the parents to get it off of their fighting. So they come in and they say, now let's fix the child. COVID-19 has caught our attention, and it shows us the inequalities of both physical and mental health services. Often the poorest and most vulnerable have been the ones who have succumbed to the disease. COVID-19 presents the acceptable reasons for being sick, because in most of our societies, there's a stigma attached to being labeled with mental illness. We can be physically sick, but you can't have mental illness. That's something verboten. We live with tensions and stresses all the time and probably don't pay much attention to them. However, when they affect our bowel system with gas and diarrhea, we have to stop and pay attention to those physical symptoms, but we won't really treat the underlying conditions of anxiety or fear, which also affect our immune system, which then again makes us more prone to catching another disease. I find it interesting as a church, and I sometimes go to various different parishes sometimes just to hear what's going on. I don't hear us call our members' attention to mental health. We have many members who suffer depression and anxiety. We also have many people who are chronically ill. But we talk many times in the pulpit about moral health, but we don't talk about mental health, and they're connected. When I talk about chronically ill, I'm talking about the people who are incapacitated and often isolated due to ongoing depression, anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and forms of dementia. Like many societies, in many societies, they are isolated in families or they are placed in nursing homes, hospitals, and prisons, or live on the street. In Chicago, the largest mental health hospital is Cook County Jail, and our prisons are full of mentally ill. Many people are afraid of them, and some societies attribute their diseases to demonic possession. Because they live vulnerable lifestyles and incongruent settings during COVID, they have been vulnerable for catching the disease and have died. COVID should call our attention to them in our societies and the need to be able to work and treat them. The siren call of COVID-19 has affected most of us through elevated levels of fear and anxiety provoked by the news we daily hear, which is augmented by the lockdowns of isolation and quarantine. Because the often recommended therapeutic way to work through fears and anxiety that we associate with trauma is, believe it or not, through group therapy. And we can't do that except online. And with the therapist, we have to break through the isolation so that we see that we're not alone and we feel safe and secure. Many people have been found stressed staying at home and in the family, often in tight quarters, doing work at home, teaching the children at home. And when there are disagreements, there's no way escaping the disagreements. You're stuck. You have to stay home. To reach others on the outside is through computers, tablets, and smartphones. Often in family life, these windows to the outside are shared for school, work, and entertainment. Everyone wants to use the device with the biggest screen. There is often a limited bandwidth, and who gets to use it? Parents for work or kids for school. There's a lot of stress, which sometimes gets expressed in violence and leads to domestic violence. The prevalence of mental health challenges. This is a study from the CDC 4 months into the pandemic. In the study of the CDC conducted with a representative panel of 1,497 participants in the June of 2020, 40.9% of respondents self-reported at least with one adverse mental or behavioral health condition, usually in debilitating symptoms of anxiety or depression. 30.9 respondents reported conditions that would be diagnosed as trauma or stress-related disorders, what we call TSRD, trauma stress-related disorder related to the pandemic. 26.3% of the respondents reported that they had increased their use of substances, drugs, and alcohol. And I'm not talking legal drugs, I'm talking street drugs. 10.7% indicated they had considered suicide in the past 30 days, which was highest among 18 to 24-year-olds, which was 25.5%. Hispanics reported 18.6% of suicidal ideation, and Blacks reported 15.1%. When professions were considered such as adult caregivers, those taking care of adults in their homes or in nursing homes or hospitals, and the essential workers who may be working well, it would be grocery stores and other places, 30.7% had some suicidal ideation. What are the common factors that link all of us together? Isolation. Workplaces, schools, hospitals, places of businesses and entertainment, along with churches, have been emptied out and closed their doors in an effort to stop the virus. No one knows who's carrying it because many people are asymptomatic. As a result, nations have shut down their borders and are quarantined from each other. The loss, we have all lost something or someone due to COVID-19. Sports fans lost their entertainment. What I lost most probably was going to be able to coffee shops and restaurants to talk with friends. Important life events like birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, and ordinations are held without friends and family. Here at the college, we have a person, one of our vocation directors, was ordained last May. Basically, he was ordained in a closet, and he had no one really around to witness that. And that's an important life event. He grieves that loss. We have lost SVD members and have not been able to collectively grieve. I have to say, vaccines are a hope for many of us. I received about 4 weeks ago my second vaccine. And I say this a little bit with guilt because living in what the other participants have talked about, living in a society where we have access to the vaccines and ample access, I found that a lot of burden was lifted after I took that second shot. I was able to let go of some of the anxiety and fears I have. But collective trauma does not just disappear. The feelings of fear and anxiety will stay around, and they have become part of us. We have to look at what will be the new normal. Should we shed light on the disparity of care for minorities, women, and the chronically mentally ill? The unequal access to both physical and mental health services, as I talked about, the unequal access to vaccines, which again, we are seeing a lot of difficulties. There's also a need to help people find more positive coping strategies in life. And I think I would like to throw this out to the church. Help us to find those positive coping strategies of dealing with anxiety and fear. And that we also can acknowledge that depression is in our communities. The other part is, how do we deal with the violence that comes from not dealing with these events and illnesses? COVID-19 has taught us that isolation is not healthy for our integral well-being, as well as for individuals and nation state. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Llyod, popularly known as Sam. You like that particular name. Thank you very much for giving this very understanding of a collective trauma, explaining in different ways how not only the physical health we need to be concerned with, but also the mental health and the different concerns related with that. So you're asking the questions, how that we could really deal with that, what you call aspects of mental health, especially dealing with fear, tension, the stress, the suicide rates, which are really going up, and so forth. Therefore, how we could really come in terms with these kind of mental agony or mental activities in that sense. Therefore, you also gave some examples like, we are not able to collectively grieve the persons who have really lost our dear ones. So many other aspects which has given this collective trauma. Therefore, what are the ways? These realities, how do we face? And where we go? Yes, these are a lot of questions. Certainly, we can also find answers collectively. So we have finished, in fact. What has happened? Yes. We also have different aspects in this particular program. As we have seen, 3 speakers have completed their presentations. Therefore, now it is a time for certain questions. We will open it up, some of the questions which came on the screen or in the chat box. Now to Carlos, can you just to ask some of the questions that came up in the chat box?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a question for Father Joseph, our first resource speaker. The question is this new humanity after COVID-19 created on the extinction of the poor ones?
Yeah, that's it's a very interesting question, because it takes off from the content of what I was saying, that the poor will be more at the receiving end, and therefore the poor, the elderly, the people on the margins, it is somehow leading to their kind of an extermination unless communities, nations, and organizations such as ours take concrete steps to prevent that. In a sense, in a very indirect sense, I agree with that particular question. Thanks, Father Carlos. Yeah.
I have a question now for Jacek, Father Jacek. Do you think that cultural approach could help eradicate COVID-19 or any pandemic in the future?
I think the cultural approach is very important. This is I will refer to this evidence-based medicine. You have to rely on the facts, on the evidence, on the spot, and we should not apply the same policy everywhere. For instance, lockdown. In European countries is a different context than let's say in Zambia or in other African countries where people will live from day to day and they have no savings. So that shows that we should never follow up one policy, and we should respect our cultural differences.
Thank you. And a question for Father Lloyd. Father Lloyd, how to make our community life in order to deal with this collective trauma of COVID?
Well, I think the first way is that we have to acknowledge that it's there, it's present, and to acknowledge that it exists in our places, in our communities. I see it as that we still have people that are afraid to eat together. So how do we, even after many of us have received the vaccines, how do we begin to ritualize that this has happened and that we need to also begin to come and bring together, help each other break through the physical distancing that has happened. Thank you for that phrase. The physical distance that has happened, and to break that down and to try to bring people together in terms of this, but also to acknowledge with each other our fears and our anxieties that are there. We can't break down those fears and anxieties without first acknowledging that they're there. I'm a psychologist. That's what we do, is we help people acknowledge those and then to try to overcome and find ways to work through them.
Carlos, you have any more questions?
If we have time, I have another question for Father Jacek. How to choose between contradicting scientific results as a basis for political and social behavior?
That I think it's not easy to see what is false, what is not, what knowledge is fake, what news is fake, what is not. That's what I said. Knowledge is dispersed and scattered. And we should allow people to speak out. If we have, let's say, that example is good. We have in Europe another we have in the United States different approaches. To fight the COVID-19 in Florida and California, the completely different in Sweden, in Poland. It already shows after 1 year that some people were wrong, focusing on one way, fighting the COVID-19. Once again, I'm saying the knowledge is dispersed and scattered, and one mind, one person, one government is not able, to fight the COVID-19, and we have to use our knowledge and to share everything is on the internet, but one person wouldn't be able, to choose one way how to do it.
Okay, to Joseph, there are many questions who have come. Most of them are rather related one. How can we reduce the inequality in the world, especially in the context of toxic capitalism? That's what one of the participants had written here.
Yeah, that's a very tall order, actually. Yeah, and I think it is also something very relevant, obviously. In one sense, congregations are like ours in grassroots levels where many of our confreres are working in teams with others. we are engaged in some of these activities already. The issue is at a very macroeconomic level. Neoliberal economics has become something like there is no alternative kind of an issue. That is where visions of alternative economics. I particularly would like to take up by what one confrere wrote on the chat box, the idea of Tim Jackson. I'm taking it from the chat box, okay? Prosperity without growth, that idea. And so there are economists who are actually imagining a different macroeconomic approach. There is Amartya Sen, Martha Nussbaum, and Jean Drèze, three of them together. They have proposed over a period of last 2 decades what they call capabilities approach. So you have capabilities approach, you have idea like prosperity without growth. So you have people who are proposing alternative models at the macroeconomic level. But that is not adopted by nations because the neoliberal model is seen as the only important, only workable model. So that is on the macroeconomic level. On the very microeconomic level, it is how do we, with whom are we working, for whom are we working, whom are we serving? These basic questions become very, very relevant in our grassroots level initiatives. So these are some kind of responses to that question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that particular input as well as your reflection. Now I come to Llyod. More or less the similar question was also raised regarding how to respond to inequality, especially regarding distribution of vaccines and so forth. But I want to come to a particular pertinent question some people have just put up here is, those who got to COVID, the others look down upon them. There is a kind of a trauma or prejudice. Even within the society, that is what they said. Even among the confreres, those who got COVID, they find it rather put down or look down and prejudice and so forth. What is your message for us?
Well, that's very interesting because I'm going to connect it again with mental illness, because I think we also look down on our members who are mentally ill, and we have them in our communities. We seem to think that illness, whether it is physical or mental, is a weakness. Oh my God, you know, we all have that possibility of being weak, if you want to. And I think we need to overcome our prejudices about what is illness and how do we reach out to the people that are sick, and how do we reach out to people who both are physically sick and who are mentally sick. In the past, I mean, I think of the saints who gave their lives to reach out to the people who are sick. Well, maybe we need more saints. maybe we need people who are also compassionate, because this is what the story is about. How do we become compassionate to each other? I was fortunate when I did get sick. I had community members who were reaching out, making sure that I had food, making sure that they had the medical attention that I needed, and checking up. Are you breathing all right? What's going on? I felt very, very much cared for and loved. And that's what we're about. Can we be compassionate people to each other? You know, no matter what type of illness we have.
Thank you very much for this particular sharing. Well, there are many more questions and different other aspects, but all the same, we need to proceed. We need to have some, what we call a rest, a little gap, a little break. Then we need to continue. So I would wind up this particular first session now, and then please take 15 minutes break, and then we come back for the next 3 presenters. Okay. Thank you very much for all the 3 of you. Wonderful presentation, personal reflections, researches which was done. You really just unfolded to us. Thank you. 15 minutes break, we come back.